You know how some memories just get lodged in your brain, no matter how hard you try to forget them. That's what happened to me. This one weekend, one decision, changed everything for me, and I still can't make sense of it. I've tried, believe me. But when something defies logic, it's like a splinter in your mind that you can't pull out. And I guess I need to talk about it. Maybe this will help. It started in the middle of summer, just after my 30th birthday. A few friends and I decided to rent a house out by the lake for a long weekend. We were all overworked, burned out, and just wanted a few days to relax. No stress, no city noise, just some beers, a barbecue, and the quiet of nature. There were 4 of us. Me, my friend Mike, his girlfriend Sarah, and my best friend Julia. We'd known each other for years, and it had been a while since we had all gotten together like this. It sounded perfect, especially since the house we found was nestled in this picturesque little spot in the Adirondacks. The photos made it look almost too good to be true. Big porch, huge windows overlooking the lake, and a dock where we could swim. We set out early on Friday, making the 3-hour drive from the city without any issues. When we finally pulled up to the house, I'll admit, it was even better than the pictures. It looked like one of those perfect getaway spots you see in travel magazines. Mike immediately cracked open a beer. Julia and Sarah started exploring the house, and I just stood there on the porch, taking it all in. It was peaceful. The first day passed without incident. We spent most of the time lounging by the lake, grilling burgers, and catching up on life. There was a short hiking trail nearby, so we took a quick walk through the woods, but we didn't venture too far, just enough to feel like we were in the middle of nowhere. By the time the sun set, we were all in that relaxed, hazy state, enjoying the simple quiet that only comes when you're far from civilization. That night, something odd happened. Not terrifying, just weird. We were all in the living room playing cards when we heard this strange noise from outside. It was faint at first, almost like a soft buzzing. I thought maybe it was a swarm of insects, but the sound grew louder and sharper, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like someone rubbing metal against metal, a kind of scraping sound, but drawn out and distant. "What the hell is that?" Julia asked, setting down her cards. Mike shrugged. Probably just some animal, maybe deer rubbing their antlers on the trees or something. But it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was too, mechanical. We all went to the windows to check, but the thick trees blocked most of the view. The sound stopped after a few minutes, and we tried to brush it off, laughing awkwardly before going back to the game. But I could tell everyone felt a little uneasy. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house was quiet now, too quiet. The kind of silence that presses down on you, like the world is holding its breath. I kept telling myself I was just overthinking it, that we were in the woods, and weird noises were part of the deal, but the silence, it was unnatural. The next day, the tension between us had eased. Mike made us all pancakes, and we spent the morning on the dock, swimming and sunbathing. It was the kind of day that melts away any worries you have. The weather was perfect, the lake was calm, and by the time the afternoon rolled around, the weird noise from the night before was a distant memory. That evening, we decided to build a fire by the lake. There was an old fire pit near the shore, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned this deep orange and pink, casting long shadows across the water. It was peaceful again, too peaceful. I don't remember who noticed it first, but at some point, the conversation stopped, and we all became aware of something strange. The woods were silent again, no insects, no wind rustling through the trees, no sound of birds. It was like someone had flipped a switch, and all the life around us had just paused. "Does anyone else hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We all strained to listen, but the only sound was the crackling of the fire. That's when I heard it again, the scraping. The scraping, the same sound from the night before, but this time it was louder. Closer, closer. Okay, that's freaky, Julia said, sitting up straighter. Mike tossed another log on the fire, trying to play it cool. It's probably just a branch rubbing against another tree or something. Relax. But none of us were relaxed. The sound grew louder, and then we saw it. At the edge of the trees, just beyond the firelight, a figure stood motionless. It was too far to make out any details, but it was there, just standing, watching. "What the hell?" I whispered. For a long moment, none of us moved. We just stared at the figure, waiting for it to do something, anything. But it didn't. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the trees. "Hey!" Mike shouted, standing up. "Who's there?" No answer. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone playing a prank or a random hiker, whoever, or a random hiker. Whatever or whatever this was, it didn't feel right. "We need to go inside," Sarah said, her voice shaking. None of us argued. We quickly gathered our things and headed back to the house, locking the door behind us. I remember feeling ridiculous, like we were overreacting, but there was something about the way that figure just stood there that made my skin crawl. That night, none of us slept well. Every creak of the house made my heart race, and I kept picturing that figure at the edge of the trees, just standing there, waiting. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe it had been a trick of the light, or maybe it was just a random person passing by. But we all knew something was wrong. The tension was thick, and no one wanted to admit they were scared. We decided to go for a hike to clear our heads. Maybe being out in the daylight would help us shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over us. We took the same trail as before, walking in silence, the only sound the crunch of our footsteps on the dirt path. But the further we went, the more uneasy I felt. The trees seemed different. They were too close together, their branches tangled like they were reaching for us. About an hour into the hike, we found something strange. A small clearing, not much bigger than the size of a living room. In the center was an old, rusted-out metal structure. It looked like the remains of some kind of machine, but it was twisted and broken, like it had been there for years. "What is that?" Julia asked, stepping closer. Mike walked over to it, kicking the dirt around it. "Looks like an old piece of equipment." But there was something unsettling about it. The way it was just sitting there, abandoned, with no sign of who had left it or why. And that's when I noticed it, the marks on the ground. Scratches, deep and jagged, as if something heavy had been dragged through the clearing. That scraping sound. "Let's head back," I said quickly. "This place is creeping me out." No one argued. We turned around and made our way back to the house, but the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see that figure again, standing at the edge of the trees, waiting. That night, things escalated. We were all sitting in the living room, trying to act like everything was fine, but the tension was unbearable. The wind had picked up outside, howling through the trees, and the fire in the hearth was flickering wildly. I remember staring at the flames, trying to lose myself in the warmth, when suddenly the lights went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and for a moment no one moved. "What the hell?" Mike muttered, fumbling for his phone. I grabbed mine too, using the flashlight to illuminate the room. Did the power go out? "Must have," Julia said, though her voice sounded uncertain, "but it's not storming." That's when we heard it, the knocking. It was soft at first, barely audible over the wind, but it grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the front door. "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" Mike asked, standing up. "Don't open it," I said quickly, my voice more panicked than I intended. Mike paused, looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "Why not?" But I couldn't explain it. I just had this overwhelming feeling that if we opened that door, something terrible would happen. The knocking continued, and then it stopped. Silence. For a moment, none of us breathed. Then, slowly, the sound returned, this time coming from the windows, a soft tapping like fingernails against the glass. One window, then another, and another, and another, until it was coming from all sides of the house. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah whispered, clutching onto Julia. I felt my heart racing, my palms slick with sweat. This wasn't normal. This wasn't someone playing a prank. Something was out there. And then, just as suddenly it started, the tapping stopped. We waited, listening to the silence, too scared to move. After what felt like hours, the power flickered back on, and the lights filled the room again. But none of us felt any relief. "I think we need to leave," I said quietly. Everyone nodded in agreement. The next morning, we packed up and left as quickly as we could. The ride home was tense, no one speaking much, but I knew we were all thinking the same thing. What the hell had happened out there? It's been weeks since that weekend, and I still don't have any answers. Sometimes, late at night, I'll hear that scraping sound again, faint but unmistakable. I'll look out the window, expecting to see that figure at the edge of the trees, just standing there, waiting. But there's nothing. I've tried to forget about it, to convince myself that it was all just our imaginations playing tricks on us. But deep down, I know the truth. Something was out there. Something was watching us, and I have a feeling it's still watching.